So now that we've talked about all the different layers in the OSI model, we need to conceptually understand what happens to data when it moves down and up the OSI model stack. So we're going to talk about that in this lecture. So what happens is a specific thing called data encapsulation and data decapsulation. So what do I mean when I'm talking about those? Well, when we're talking about encapsulation, we're talking about when we add chunks of information to our data. So what am I talking about when we had chunks of information? Well, this occurs when we start at the very top of the OSI model and we're interacting with our computer and we're trying to send data across the network. Well, when that data goes down the OSI stack, we're adding on additional information such as our source and our destination IP and MAC addresses, any encryption, any encoding, and setting up those sessions and all that sort of information. So what happens is that we add chunks of information and we call this encapsulation. So this occurs when we send data from our computer. Now, the exact opposite occurs when it goes up the stack and data is being received at the other end. So when data is being received at the other end, we call that data decapsulation. And the exact opposite happens. We remove these chunks of information that we added on. So the MAC addresses, IP addresses, and everything else. So by the time that it gets up to the very top of the other end, where the user receives that data and information on their computer, all the receiving is the information that needs to be outputted, and none of that extra chunks of information such as our IP addresses, our MAC addresses, and our encryption and all that other stuff. So now that we've introduced encapsulation and decapsulation, let's go ahead and let's visualize it, because this may not make that much sense, but I guarantee once we jump to this next screen, it's going to make a whole lot more sense. So here's a visualization of it. And here we are starting at the very top, and let me go ahead and show you what we're talking about. So when we're starting at the very top, it's just the data. But as we go down this application layer, we're adding on additional information. And so you'll notice we add on a bit of information here for the application layer. So there's an application layer protocol such as HTTP for the presentation, determining how we're going to encode the data, the session, determining how we're going to manage the session, the transport, determining how we're going to reliably send that information and how we're going to break it up and get it there, the network portion where we're going to be adding on our IP addresses, the data link portion where we're going to be adding on our MAC addresses, and the physical portion where we're going to be breaking this up into actual bits and bytes of electrical signals or light bursts. And as you notice, when we go down, we're encapsulating the data. So we start with the bare data, and by the time we get to the bottom, we have all sorts of information on the bottom added to it. And then when we go back and we go over to the other computer on the other side of the network, we decapsulate it. So we take off that information that we don't need. And by the time we get back up to here, it's nothing but the raw data. And that's how this process works in a nutshell from a conceptual point of view. Now let's go ahead to the next slide and let's visualize this again. So now I want to just give you an idea of some of this information that we're adding on. Now I'm not talking about every aspect of what we're adding on, but I want to talk about some of the important aspects. And remember, when you're sending information across a network, we are sending IP packets and Ethernet packets. Well, we have to send a source and a destination IP address, so that needs to be added on. And when we're sending our MAC address information to communicate on the LAN, we need to have a source and a destination MAC address as well, so that's our Ethernet address. And so I just wanted to highlight those two important things, because from a beginner's perspective, we need to understand that there's going to be a source and destination IP and MAC address in addition to all this other stuff that we added on as well. So we can just assume that this is all that other sorts of information that we're adding on as well. And what we call, so here's the actual data, what we call these headers of information added on. And so we start at the top and we just add on more and more information. And that is the OSI model, data encapsulation and data decapsulation in a nutshell. So, in this section, we started off talking about the OSI model by itself and the layers, and then we reached the point where we talked about all of them, and we could bring it together, and I could show you how it worked visually from a conceptual model where data is encapsulated with information to send it across the network, and once it gets to its destination, that data is stripped off, that extra information stripped off to the point where the only thing that is delivered on the other end is the actual application data itself. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next lecture.